Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the AG podcast. We are here with Pastor Phil and Pastor Greg. Dr.
Hi.
Greg. Sorry. Excuse me, sir.
If you do that again, he's going to walk off the set.
That's right.
And I'm your host, Pastor Brian. And today we are going to be piggybacking a little bit off of what we talked about in the last episode, which is the spiritual awakening we've been seeing. A lot of younger people are now coming to the churches all over the world in droves. And, one thing that we know that people might be running into is that they're going to be looking to the Bible. And as we've seen in people that we've interacted with just in our own church, sometimes there are things that kind of stop you in your tracks when you read them. Things about you read about God in the Old Testament and Jesus in the New Testament. And sometimes the perceptions can be is that God in the Old Testament is this kind of violent, barbaric God at times. And then God in the New Testament through Jesus is kind of like this hippy dippy, very friendly, kind of Barney character who just wants everybody to love each other and get along.
Barney the dinosaur?
Barney the dinosaur, right.
Not Fred Flintstone's friend, Barney.
Both of them are pretty friendly, I would say. Both of them work in this.
Name what generation you're talking about.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Both of them, I wouldn't mind hanging out with every once in a while. But, obviously, people, as they start to really study the Bible and not some of these tropes that can be kind of, added to cultural perception of Christianity, they're going to run into some verses and some passages that might be a little uncomfortable and feel like, I don't know what to do with this. And if someone's feeling the call from the Lord to come into it, but then encounters these, they might wrestle with them and shake their faith. And we want to just take some time and just tackle those things and be like, hey, sometimes there's things that God does and we have to just accept, but sometimes we can find other places in the scripture where we can actually attribute God's holiness, God's love, and his, mercy in actual situations that may come across.
I
confusing.
don't think that we have to know all of the answers to all of the questions. But we should be able to say, I don't know the answer to that question, and that's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
Instead of pretending like it's not really a question. And
It's usually how cults are formed is when I have the answers that no one's willing to say, maybe.
Yeah. Or people lose their faith because they know that there's a question they don't have an answer to, but everybody is pretending like that question really doesn't exist. And so somebody's hiding something because, well, if I can't answer it, well, it must not be true.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of things that are true that I don't know the answer to.
Right.
But I also think too that there are a lot of answers to these questions that certainly as new people are coming to faith and new people are beginning to walk in their faith and they're confronted with these questions like what you mentioned, there are real legitimate answers for it. And so we may not have the answer to all the questions, but a lot of them we do. As we search the Bible and we pull out nuggets and we match those nuggets together, we see a truth unveiling itself. And so we shouldn't be afraid of the questions. We shouldn't be afraid of saying, I don't know. We'll have to find that out when God gives, when we see the Lord. One of my professors in college, had a little pad in his shirt pocket with a pencil, and that was his God question book. And every time we asked a question he didn't know, he would pull it out and he would write it down in the book. And if the rapture happened, he said he was going to grab my chest because I'm taking my list to heaven and I want to ask Jesus all these questions. Okay. And so don't be afraid either way, but I do think there's a balance in that. Yes, there's a lot of crazy questions, but there's a lot of solid answers for those questions as well.
Okay, so what I prepared is some questions that I've wrestled with in my faith as I got saved at 18 and I'm 33 now. And so over the last 15 years of my Christian life, there's been times where I've just kind of quickly turned the pages through sections that I just didn't want to.
Did we know he was only 33?
No, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Don't say you think I'm older.
No.
Just kidding. So basic, and then some questions I've researched online about like what are some of the hot topic questions just throughout the world that people just wrestle with. And so I'm going to start
Super fun
with some of the research one, which kind of coincides with things that I've wrestled with that I've spent time that I've kind of resolved within myself and my faith. But I think a big one is the genocide of Canaan. So Joshua's on the scene now, and they've crossed over to entering into it. Moses has been forbidden to come in because of his sin in Deuteronomy. And now basically all that's left for Israel to do is to start clearing out Canaan. A lot of people can view Canaan as they are just not bothering anybody.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden God says, get him out of here. But not just get him out of here, but God in certain instances says to kill everybody,
Mhm.
animals, women, children, wipe them out.
Mhm.
Reading that just front and center can be, how do we rectify that with Jesus in the New Testament, who would ultimately lay his life down for us to be given grace and mercy?
Yeah. I'm afraid of stepping
All right, that's
on.
all we have for today, folks.
Thank you. Of stepping on
We're
other
out of time.
toes. To think that everything was like an Eden in Canaan, number one, is really a misconception of what was going on.
Right.
The same thing, there's a book written a long time ago, From Sea to Shining Sea, and it was about the expansion of the North American continent when people came to the United States. And I just remember the first couple chapters were specifically talking about how much the Native American population was not people living in paradise and everybody getting along well with each other and treating each other wonderfully.
Mhm.
I've been in native populations, indigenous populations, and paganism is brutal. There is always infant child sacrifice.
Mm.
There is devaluation of women that is really unparalleled in anything going on today.
Right.
The brutality of people just because they're from a different tribe or they live in a different place. It's not like everybody gets along with everyone else and here come the Israelites and they're just gonna mess up this whole land.
Mm-hmm.
The cruelty and the torture that was going on in the culture was way worse
Right.
than what Israel was going to do to them. They were already doing that to each other.
Yeah.
And first off, they weren't told to kill everybody in the land. They were told to drive them out of the land. One, they were told to kill places,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't a blanket. Everybody in here, you need to annihilate.
Right.
No. The majority of the places they were to drive them out of the land.
Yeah.
And
Specifically out of their midst, out of their culture.
Right.
Not to take
Out of the promised
prisoners,
land.
not
Yes.
to take
Right.
wives, or
Right.
to,
Right.
which was a common thing that they would do
Because
with
of the infiltration of the pagan religions.
Right.
It was demonic, pure demon worship. They were sacrificing their sons and daughters to Molech,
Mm-hmm.
putting a child on a burning altar.
Yeah.
That Israel in the later on ended up doing too.
Right. Yeah.
And so the need to get that out of the land, you cannot tolerate a hint of that because it's infectious and
Mhm.
it's demonic. And so it's like if you have cancer. Well, how much cancer do you want to leave in?
Right.
You might have to actually take out healthy organs, parts of things,
Yeah.
to get the whole cancer out.
Yeah.
And so, and how are you going to decide, okay, this person in this house, well, he's kind of bad. This person in this house, they're really bad. This person over there, they're demonic. Well, okay, in a battle, you're going to choose. How do you do that? How do you make those kinds of distinctions in a battle? Okay, everybody that's kind of good, raise your hand, and we're just going to drive everybody else out. You can't do that. It's human situation. Also, at what age will a child not want to avenge his parents?
Right. Eventually, those kids are going to become adults, and they're going to be mad.
And they're going to be
Yeah.
mad. There have been movies. I don't remember all of the movies, but I remember watching one, and it was set way back in whatever time. But the kid grows up, and he's Inigo Montoya.
Yeah. You killed my father.
You killed my father. Prepare to die. Well, do you want a whole country full of Inigo Montoyas running around? No. So there's some practicalities that you have to take care of when you're going into a battle situation. So you can't leave everybody to thinking. And there are also that they're going to, well, this guy, okay, we got him when he's 5 years old, so he's going to be okay. Well, I've also seen cultures where 5-year-olds carry guns.
Right.
And they're just as committed to the task because dad's committed to it, brother's committed to it. I mean, the practicalities of deciding who lives and who dies is really complicated. And I don't know that they were able to make those kinds of choices.
They did not. Another note too. Sorry, go ahead, Phil.
I think along with Greg's point, it would be if we could make some comparisons today. If we in America put our army on the northern border and went into Canada and wiped them out, it would be completely unjust. Mm-hmm. Okay. But if we send our special forces into the Middle East and we take out the Taliban or we take out Al-Qaeda, mm-hmm. okay, we call that justified.
Right.
Okay. We call it justified because of the condition of what was happening on the ground there.
Yeah.
Okay? So when God tells people to be driven out or to be killed, he knows the condition of what's going on the ground, and they have reached a point of no return. Okay. One of the things that was super helpful to me in this whole discussion, in Genesis 15, verse 16, as God is telling Abraham, your descendants are going to go into Egypt for 400 years, and they're going to be slaves because I'm going to build a mighty nation out of them. That was one reason God sent the people down into Egypt, was to build a mighty nation. But the second reason is in Genesis 15 and verse 16, God tells this to Abraham. Then in the fourth generation, or in 400 years, you will return here, okay, back to the edge of Canaan, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. Okay, so God sees the Amorites, the Canaanites, moving in this direction, okay, of gross immorality, gross demonic activity, and yet he's going to give them 400 more years to figure it out, mm-hmm. okay, and their cup is not full. That tells us that God is seeing this direction that the Canaanites are going. He knows that there's going to come a time when they move from being Canadians to Taliban, mm-hmm. okay? And if they're Taliban, he's justified in killing them.
Yeah.
If they're Canadians, he's not. And he's giving them 400 more years to figure it out.
Yeah.
Which exhibits his patience. Okay. God is a very patient God, and human life has an extremely high value, but there is a cap to it.
Yes.
Okay. When he says that the evil cup has been filled, there have been cultures, there have been people groups that have become so perverse, so wicked, so demonic, so evil, that their cup of evil has reached its fill, and God cannot allow them to perpetrate on the earth what they're doing. And so his only resolve is to send in another nation to wipe them out, to actually protect the rest of humanity. And in the case you're talking about, it's the Jewish people. He's accomplishing two things. He's squashing wickedness, and he's giving a promised land.
Yeah.
Okay?
And then he gets in trouble for it.
And then he gets in trouble for it.
What do you, oh, there, God, why doesn't, people scream, why doesn't God do something about this immorality?
Okay.
And then he does something about the immorality. Whoa, how dare he do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we have to, in my thinking, the best comparisons today are, the Canaanites weren't Canadians.
Right.
Okay, the Canaanites were Al Qaeda and the
We're like, oh,
Taliban.
hi, Israel, welcome. And then there's like stab behind the back.
Or they're the pagan tribes of the jungles of Brazil that when you walk in, you get killed.
Yeah.
Because you're an outsider. Okay.
Right.
That's what we have to be
It's
thinking
not that
here.
way anymore in Brazil. Just make the.
It's not?
No,
Nowhere?
no, not in Brazil.
Well, okay. Well, that guy that went to that tribe just a couple years ago, right? He went out to that island to evangelize
that wasn't
them,
Brazil.
and they killed him and ate him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there are cultures even today that are that dark.
Yeah, they
that
are.
dark.
Yeah, so
And
basically-
also, how many those villages, those towns, those city states, they all knew they were coming. They all knew the Jews were coming. They all knew Israel was coming.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh, what are they doing here? No, they knew they were coming, so they could have left also. Besides that, we hear all this, well, what about all the children? How many children do you think were actually in those villages? We act like there were just this wholesale slaughter of all these little babies going around. They
Yeah.
were already killing their own babies.
Right. It was their culture.
I mean, how many have been aborted in the United
we don't
States?
have any. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, one of the studies I did about it was directly talking about the reason that certain times God called them. You're right, it wasn't in general, but there were certain instances where God did say when they were overthrowing certain cities that the children and the women don't take the women as wives, and then you have to slaughter everything.
Yeah.
And that's, what would be inevitable, which inevitably did happen because Israel failed to obey that, was that they had children growing up hating Israel and a more fervent desire to go against Israel as they got older, and then infiltrating other relationship with kids. But then the women, which is still very much men and women dynamic today, which is, men are generally weak for women. We see that happen with David and Solomon, which that was the thing that kept them, or that dragged them away to allow compromises.
And Balaam, that's how Balaam got the whole nation to
right. And so you have you have these young kids growing up with other kids, growing up a next generation mix, and then you have men who also are intermarrying with these women and then having kids with them. And then basically, like you're saying, it's like you have this cancer, not that the human life is the cancer, but the culture that they've created, which was anti-human life. This is and these people were growing and building cities and occupying a land that God wanted to redeem.
Right.
And that it wasn't just these innocent people just, kumbayaing, and then they just came in with tanks and planted a flag.
I think, if you, if let's trace the history of the people of Israel. Abraham gets the call. They go down to Egypt for 400 years. They're enslaved. They come out for 40 years, and then they take the promised land. Okay. Now, once they get into the promised land, they're an isolated people group. Okay. And if we look at the worst they became, okay, when God really had to get after the Israelites, what were they doing? They were worshiping false gods. They were burning children at the altar. They were acting immorally. Where did they learn all of that from?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They learned it from the remnant of the tribes that were in Canaan that they either didn't drive out or they didn't wipe out. And so that gives us a hint on the condition of the entire land of Canaan before Israel went in and redeemed it. If we look at what were they doing at their worst and whom did they learn that from, it's the people that were there before.
Yeah.
So we know, like you're saying, that entire land was that wicked and that evil and that against God.
Mm-hmm.
And so God said, we got to drive them out or we got to knock them out.
And the cultures at that time also understood that battles were not between people, they were between gods.
Yeah.
And that would not have been a relevant question in that day's morality. Well, how dare they kill all of us? That wouldn't have that would not have been a concept in that day.
Right.
That would have been, well, of course they're going to kill us because Their
Yeah.
God is stronger than our God. So we lost. And so it just makes sense that we worship this God. He's not as strong as their God. So those are the consequences.
Yeah.
Somehow we have elevated our morality to where we tell God that's wrong. And they would have never done that. Even the pagan of the pagan wouldn't have said, oh, he's killing all those innocent people. Well, he must be a bad God. That was somehow we've elevated ourselves to the place where we get to pass judgment on God's decisions.
Would you say that generally when we interact with God in that way, that there's just kind of a lack of understanding of God's holiness?
Yeah.
There's a term that's a millennial term. I'll teach you guys
Uh-oh.
and how
All right,
I
here we
describe
go.
things. So we say we use it's heavy metal. So when we say something is heavy metal, it means like it's no joke. Like it is serious. Like it's intense. It's obviously a term from like the 80s hair rock stuff. But sometimes when I'm talking about with young adults about these passages, we say like God is heavy metal. Like he is holy. He's not to be messed with, and sin can exist in his presence. And so when we see God do something like that, where he calls for something that we seem like that's intense. Like that is a lot, and it's hard for us to rectify because sometimes we grow up in a church that just promotes God and Jesus as, this, poster father and son, at a picnic and inviting everyone to the picnic. But then we see stuff like that. Sometimes we're not interacting with that image of God or that side of his, personality or his image, because we're given this more kind of neutered, soft, because we want people to come and accept Christ, but maybe not give them the full picture.
We are the children of God, and Jesus calls us his friends, and there is a very intimate, loving, caring, compassionate
Abba Father
feeling.
Yeah.
While at the same time, we can call him Dad, but don't ever say to him, "Hey, you."
Right. Yeah, like his holiness.
How you keep both of those together. I'm not. None of us do it right all the time, or any of the time. I don't know, but there is a definite joy of being in the presence of God and fellowshipping with him, but never at the expense of thinking that we have the right to question him.
Yeah.
We can ask him questions. We were talking about you can ask God all kinds of every question. Ask him questions, but don't question him.
Right.
Like you're questioning his character. Like you can say, God, I don't understand this, but if we say, God, I think I understand this, and I don't think you did this right. Now, if my kid does that with me, that's not great, but I'll accept it because
sometimes he's right.
Yeah. Or any of the four of them do some things better than I do and know more about things than I do. And I mean, they can turn the TV on and I still have trouble with that sometimes. All those buttons. What do you do with all those buttons? Anyway, I can ask God any question that comes into my mind, but if I start questioning him as in, God, can you justify this? Or God, I'm going to pass moral judgment on what you have told. That's overstepping the bounds of being a creature when I'm talking to the Creator.
Yeah.
And yesterday in Sunday school we were going through Isaiah 6, and it has the seraphim, and it's really the only passage I could find that describe the seraphim, who they are and what they do. They fly around in the presence of God, screaming, yelling, because their voices shake the temple. So there's got to be a lot of noise going on, and they're yelling, holy, holy, holy. But they're flying with their faces covered and their feet covered because of the shame of having uncovered feet in the presence of a holy God, and they cover their eyes because they can't stand to look at him. Well, apparently they were created to be in the presence of God, and they can't look at him.
Yeah.
And they were created to be in the presence of God, and they cover their feet because of whatever shame or whether not imperfection, but not divinity. They are not God.
Yeah.
And they have to be careful, and they can't be in his presence. They recognize who he is, and they can't look at him.
Yeah.
And we think that we can just cuddle up and say, God, I think what you did in the Old Testament was wrong.
Mm.
There's nothing wrong with saying, God, I'm trying to understand what you did in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't get it. That's a legitimate question. But to say, God, I see what you did there, and I don't think I like it. We don't know who we're dealing with.
I think too, part of our confusion or part of our processing is we look at the attributes of God's character, and we know the Bible clearly says, for example, God is love, and the Bible also clearly says that he's just, and sometimes he's that consuming fire.
Mm.
And so when we see him exhibiting his attribute of love, we get all behind it and excited about it. When he withholds that attribute in the sense we think he should use it, and he exhibits justice, okay, that's the God we call strange. Okay, when in reality it's not strange at all. It's just exhibiting his different attributes.
Yeah.
We could see it when we're a dad, when we have to sometimes cuddle our kids because they're hurt or because they need wisdom, and sometimes we need to discipline them because they have gone too far. Okay, and if somebody were to observe us, we would say, well, Phil is two completely different people. Okay, he's love, but he's angry, or he's just. And it's like, no, I'm not angry. I'm just exerting my attribute as a father of justice. Yeah. And now I'm pulling that back and I'm exerting it as love. God somehow melts these together because his justice is always done out of love. Okay. That's why I think it's so enlightening that he gave the Canaanites 400 more years to get it right. Okay. Just like he gave Israel 290 more years to get it right after they stopped using the Sabbath rest. And finally he had to get them off the land. So God can melt these attributes together and be functioning 100% in them at both times. Humanly, we tend to see only one being exhibited at a time. Yeah. And we like this one, and we don't understand that one.
Yeah.
And we have to be careful when we try and bring God to our morality, change some of the things that appear clear in Scripture. I got to explain this so that it's acceptable to us.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, well, maybe we just don't have the right standard of what love is. In our book, love means you just accept everybody to the point of everybody just gets along, and we just let things go. I'm sure if you and I would have been there, we wouldn't have waited 400 years.
For sure.
We'd have done something sooner.
Yeah.
Saying that is the same thing as saying, well, God should have waited longer.
Yeah.
Who knows best how long to wait?
Yeah. But I think too, like, we all have double standards, okay? In the sense that when we have an army at the northern border of our country with Canada, we don't send them in to wipe out Canadians.
Right.
Okay, because we have a moral standard there. But when we do send them to the Middle East, we wipe out the Taliban. Okay, so when it comes to people, we have two standards, and so on one we withhold, and one we execute. Right. The justice. Okay, God has the same way, and we have to trust that He knows when to withhold judgment And when he executes judgment, we've got to trust he's doing it justifiably.
Yeah.
Okay. Because we trust his character. We
Mhm.
trust his character.
And there's the verse, and I wish I could remember where it is, but will not the judge of the whole earth do what is right?
Yeah.
And the obvious answer is yes, he will. Now, will he do right by my standard? No. Will he do right by what right is? Yes. And there are so many things that we can't explain to our children because they're not capable of understanding why we did what we did.
Yeah.
I'm sure Frankie is well beyond that.
She's asked some pretty tough questions, man. I'm
But
thinking
there
about
are just times when it is ridiculous for me to try and explain. Not anymore.
You wouldn't even understand if I told you.
Yeah, you wouldn't understand it. You can't handle the truth.
You're just a baby.
You're just yeah. And when we realize God is so far above a parent's relationship to their child, that we have to use that as a metaphor because that's what we can understand. But he's so much beyond that.
Yeah.
It's what happened with Job when Job said, "Well, if God were here, I'd explain a few things to him." And God shows up, and Job can't even explain the workings of the universe. So how is he going to understand?
Yeah, that's such a good
the
conversation.
right and wrong.
Yeah.
And could God have made it understandable for Job? How that? I don't think so.
If I could have been there after that whole thing happened, that would have been like, not the way you thought that was going to go, huh, Job?
Right.
But it's not wrong to ask the questions.
Yeah.
It's right to ask the questions, but we have to ask the questions realizing I can't demand an answer that is satisfactory, and I can't use it as an excuse to pass judgment on God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think too, like just the emotional question that is. Like we think in our imagination, people being wiped out. And it's so appalling to us that emotionally we just can't see a loving God doing that. Because it makes us feel so icky when we think about that happening. But that's our emotions. That's not God's character. Okay. And so and that's why I think, going back to what I said earlier about there are some answers here to this.
Right.
And there are little snippets of answers like, the cup is not full yet, so God waits for. So God is patient. Oh, so it must have been really bad because God's given him 400 more years. So God is patient. He's not an angry God that is ready to rampage the Canaanites. He wants to stop this evil. He wants to redeem. I like your phrase. He wants to redeem the land. If we put all these pieces together, the answer becomes more clear and less emotional.
And he does in Isaiah. He uses the symbolism of a guy that's got a vineyard. Now he's talking about Israel this time. He's not talking about the Canaanites. So this is hundreds of years later, and he says, there was this guy and he has a vineyard and he did everything he could for this vineyard. He watered it. He took care of it. He put a house in the middle so he could watch and make sure nobody comes and does anything. And all the vineyard did was give sour grapes. Sour grapes, sour grapes. He says, what more could I do to get good grapes? I've done everything for this vineyard and it just keeps giving sour grapes. What more could I do? And he's talking about Israel at that time. And he finally says, well, I'm going to have to plow it up. I'm going to have to plow it up because I have done everything for them. And I've even disciplined the nation to the north and shown them what happens when you act like that. And they still don't repent. And Jesus he paraphrases that same reference when he's talking to to Jerusalem before his crucifixion. He talks about them being a fig tree or an olive tree, and all it does is it either doesn't produce or it just gives rotten fruit.
Mhm.
And he's alluding back to Isaiah. He says, what more, how else could I prove? What other miracle? And then he even says, even if I come back from the dead, what? You're
not going to believe.
You're not going to believe it.
Well, and I think that's a like your first point about let's ask God questions, let's not question God.
Yeah.
Okay. Huge disparity there. The second to go along with that is, if I give you an answer, will it satisfy your mind? Or are you just looking for objectionable
Yeah.
questions? Okay. If we talk this through, are you going to be settled, at least in your mind, enough to not keep stumbling over? It's like, you can answer this. Like, you worked through some of these very tough questions early on. How did you come out of that? Did you come out of that with complete satisfactory answers? Or did you come out of it with, well, I'm not totally sure about the answers, but I've learned so much about God that he's given me some of the answers and I have to trust him with the rest? How did you come up with that or come out of that?
Well, I think my heart posture going into those questions was I was a Christian and I wasn't searching to dismantle my faith, but I'd been having conversations with people at the time who brought some of these, who weren't serious about their faith, or these were objections that they had that I hadn't really dealt with myself. And in those moments, I just didn't have a sufficient answer or knowledge about them. So going into them, I wasn't tempted or struggling in a place where I was going to lose my faith, but I knew that I needed to try to understand, because of my faith, understand the Lord, and not like I need to understand you better so I can believe in you more, but more of just like, I don't know how to rectify this. And when I did search them, it was a couple sections, certain things like we'll get to in a little bit about certain times when God seems to convey that he's not sure of, doesn't know what's going to happen next, which we'll get to in a little bit. But like certain times I just kind of had to be like, like you said, God, you don't owe me. You don't owe me an explanation for me to buy into you. I need to understand. A lot of it too is that I didn't have a complete understanding of Jesus fully either, of just like how holy and heavy metal Jesus is.
You understand completely the hypostatic union of
getting there.
Divinity
I'm getting there
with total humanity. That's good.
But no, I'm just like,
yeah.
I think there's just a temptation for churches to kind of skip over those things and just help people understand that God loves them and that he died for them. But what I ended up coming out with out of these times of studying these, I came out with a much deeper understanding and gratitude for God's salvation. Because when you understand God's mercy and love in the midst of these things, and how serious God takes sin, and the depths God's willing to go to remove sin from his presence because of his holiness, we understand my place in being sinful, right, and being unworthy to be in God's holiness.
Well, that's exactly what happened to Isaiah. Because the chapter 5 of Isaiah, there are 6 woes.
Yeah.
The God and Isaiah are pronouncing against Israel and the things that they've done. Woe to you, woe to you, woe to you, because you call what is good bad and bad good, and list them all. And then in chapter 7, Isaiah sees the holiness of God, and the first words out of his mouth are, woe is me.
Yeah.
He's forgotten all about the woe is them. Well, he does say, I am a man of unclean lips.
Yeah.
And I come from a people that are unclean. And but his focus is on, he has a fuller, clearer grasp and understanding of, I don't belong here.
Yeah.
in the presence of God.
Yeah.
I don't know how we get that. I don't know how we can get to that point. I don't even know if we could stand it. if we
Right.
if we really every Sunday during worship we came to the place where we get another glimpse of God's holiness. I don't know that we in this state, not California, this human state that we are, can stand that.
Right.
And so we want little glimpses because we need them, but to expect to fully understand God's holiness and who he is and his majesty, there's no way.
Yeah.
It would be impossible to continue.
And when you think about those things and you think about where we actually stand in the midst of God's holiness, is that we are justifiably wiped out, cannot even exist in the presence of God because of our sinfulness, because of our uncleanness, that God still carried through with the plan of salvation through Jesus Christ. And then when you read the Gospels thoroughly and see that Jesus isn't this hippie just throwing peace signs everywhere and feeding everybody, but Jesus carries on through his attitude and his clearing of the temple and his just repent and just saying like hell is real and the devil is real and my Father is real.
He pronounces judgment
and
on
I
the
am
nation.
the way, the truth, and the life.
He pronounces judgment on the Pharisees. He pronounces judgment on anybody that refuses to believe
Right.
his message. It's
And then
judgment he pronounces.
And he went to the cross still to provide the grace and forgiveness necessary for us. And so like when you connect all of those dots from like, you know, God isn't this barbaric God who just kills people, but he is this holy God that we can't even fathom his holiness, but that sinfulness and sinful cultures eventually will be eradicated. And that is good. That is right. And if we're in a position where I am going to protest that, then I have a serious issue with my acceptance of God's holiness. And
Well, and I
from
think-
then on, it prevents me from really, I think, it prevents people from really tapping into accepting God's grace and merciful. If you're not willing to accept God's doing those things is right and holy and perfect and just, and that we wrestle with that outside of truly understanding it, then I feel like we're not in a position to ultimately not accept his grace and salvation, but to deeper understand it. And that deeper understanding of it, I think, really infiltrates how we live our life more and more of like, man, a God like you still did that. You know, I mean, like there's no way we could ever deserve it. We deserve to be eradicated, but you took death on yourself and gave me your righteousness and gave me that grace and mercy and forgiving me because you want me in your presence. You want to be where, like Jesus says in John, like I want them to be where we are and us to be where they are. Like that is what God, that's what God wants. And so it's amazing.
Sounds like we're moving towards Christmas with that. I mean, that's
Yeah, but then a Christmas album comes live. I'm just kidding.
Well, I think if you don't understand, if this is neutral, no bad or no good, if we don't understand the depth of depravity, then we can't understand the depth of love.
Yeah.
If we only understand, if we only think the Canaanites were this bad, okay, then we can only really understand that God is only this good.
Oh, that's good.
If I can understand that I'm a million miles away from God and look at the depths he went to restore me, okay? If we have a shallow view of his justice, we have a shallow view of his love, okay? Because so he's going to expose in very strong language the depth of the depravity of the human race so that we can understand the depth of his love that it took to bring that reconciliation together. So if we're going to be superficial on one side, we're only going to be superficial on the other side as well.
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to think through the Bible characters that had even a glimpse, any kind of a glimpse of God's presence.
True self, yeah.
And none of them that I can think of, even in the New Testament, John and Paul going to the third heaven and all that, did they ever think Can you imagine them saying, "I'm not sure that God was right doing that"?
Yeah.
Yeah. Moses, after he he's hidden in the rock. And
Yeah.
then he said, "Hey God, I know you told us go into the land and kill everybody. Do you
Yeah.
think that's really there?
Isn't that a little harsh?
A little harsh." Or
Yeah.
Isaiah,
Yeah.
after he sees the vision, and he says, it's actually funny when after he sees he gets the seraphim grabs a coal and burns his lips, and then God gives him a message. And the message is the land's going to be wiped out, or this is what you're going to tell them. And Isaiah's question is, how long do I have to give this message?
Mm.
And then God says, until what happens, happens. I'm just playing with it. I wonder if Isaiah, when he's asked how long, if he's thinking, this is going to go on too long, or God, you ought to be wiping us out right now. How long are you going to wait to bring this about? It's like, don't you see how bad we are?
Yeah.
We really deserve. I don't know what his thinking was. He just says, how long do I have to do this? And God says, until it actually comes about.
Yeah.
But I don't see John, when he has the vision of Revelation and he sees all the catastrophes and all the seven seals and the seven trumpets and the seven bowls and whatever else there is, he says, "Nah, man, that really made me question whether God is good or not."
Yeah.
He sees that these judgments are natural, honest, normal consequences.
Right.
Yeah.
For a group of people that would tell God, "We're not going to do it your way." I don't see Paul ever questioning God's making right decisions or not. When he's dealing with sin, and Jesus doesn't. It's just our point of view is so us.
Well, and I
Yes.
think that goes back to the beginning. That what's your motive in inquiring of these questions?
Yeah.
Is it to ask God questions, or is it to question God? Is it so I can dismantle my faith or deconstruct my faith, or is it to build my faith? And those motives going into these questions will determine the outcomes of the questions.
Yeah.
That you come to, not the truth, but the outcomes of the questions you're going to settle on. So it's very appropriate to start by asking, what's your motive
Yeah.
in studying these things?
All right, we are going to stop right there because we have a lot more to say about the Old Testament and the Lord and some of the things that we see that can create questions in us that we sometimes don't know how to answer without someone who's been trained in theology to talk about these things. So next week, we're going to come back, carry on with these questions with Pastor Phil and Dr. Greg, and we hope you guys have a great week until then, and we'll see you next time.